Hello, 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 and welcome back to the Climate Crisis Podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about alternative sources of energy, mainly solar power. And solar power is very important because obviously all of the power that we're using today is coming from fossil fuels. And these fossil fuels, as you may have remembered from my second episode, release a lot of toxic gases into the air called greenhouse gases. And this is what contributes to global warming and climate change. And that's what we're trying to fix now. So, one way that people figured out to start steering away from using fossil fuels is using the sun. So, technically, all of the power that we use eventually originated from the sun. For example, fossil fuels. The fossil fuels were created because of plants that were pressurized in the earth, and these plants were created because of the sun. So, eventually, everything you can trace back to the sun's energy. But what people have figured out is that we can directly take the sun's energy without having all of these in between steps, and this wastes less fossil fuels and it creates less toxic gases that are going into the air. So, solar power is a solar technology that takes potential energy from the sun and transfers it into usable forms of energy. Obviously, we can't just have the sun's rays and put a battery outside. It's not going to just charge the battery or charge your phone. We need to have a way to convert that sun's energy into another form of energy that we can actually use. So the two main types of solar panels are photovoltaics and concentrating solar thermal power. So I'm going to be talking to you about the two different types of solar energy and how it all works. And later on, I'll talk about the statistics for solar power and if it's actually worth it to get solar panels. So photovoltaics, these type of solar panels are usually the ones that will be on your house, and they'll be the ones that are on those huge fields that are just there to harness the sun's energy. And photovoltaics work by the sun's rays shining onto the solar panel, and the cells inside of the panel absorbs the sun's energy. And when the panel absorbs this energy, this creates electrical charges that move responding to an internal electrical field inside of the cell that's inside of the panel. So each of those solar panel squares have like a lot of solar panel cells inside of them. So when sunlight strikes the solar cell, electrons are knocked loose. And if the electrical conductors inside of that solar cell are attached to positive and negative charges, an electrical current is formed, and this creates the electricity. So to shorten it, the solar cell will knock some electrons loose, and those electrons will create a current, and that current creates electricity. So a single photovoltaic device produces about 1 to 2 watts of power. And in order to translate 1 to 2 watts of power into something that you can actually visualize, I'm going to give you a quick physics lesson. And you probably learned this in school if you've taken physics already. But 1 watt is equal to a joule second, and 1 joule is equal to a Newton meter. And what 1 joule you can equivocate to is if you lifted like one large apple from the ground to your waist level, that's about 1 joule. So if you were able to do one apple from the ground to your waist in 1 second, that's producing 1 watt of energy. So a single photovoltaic device produces 2 watts of power, which means it produced 2 joules in 1 second, which translates to 2 apples from the ground to your waist in 1 second. So that's not a lot of power, which is why there are thousands of photovoltaic devices inside of one panel, and there is multiple panels on one large surface. As you can see in this picture, there is 9 panels on one surface, and inside each of those panels, there's probably like hundreds of photovoltaic cells inside of that. So this is the photovoltaic method of solar energy, and the next one is, I already forgot. The next one is concentrating solar thermal power. So this is an image of what a concentrating solar thermal power solar This is a concentrating solar thermal power solar lot. Wow, that is a tough sentence to say. And this requires a lot of space, but it also maximizes the energy output instead of having just panels in a large amount of space. So CST uses mirrors to reflect and concentrate sunlight onto receivers that collect the solar energy. And all of these panels on the ground that you can see, you may think they're solar panels, but they are actually called heliostats. And essentially, these are just mirrors that are concentrating the sun's light onto that singular large tower in the middle of that huge circle. So what this tower does, it essentially does the same job as the photovoltaics, but it collects all of that sun's energy, concentrating it into one single area, which is maximizing that energy. And it is converting it into heat, which can be converted eventually into energy, which we can use to power our homes and such. So the difference between photovoltaic devices and concentrating solar thermal devices is that CST focuses all the sunlight onto a smaller point, and this is allowing it to be used in larger solar plants. As you can see here, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere, and it's taking up probably like I don't know, 100 football fields. I'm not really sure, but it's a lot of space, right? Usually with the photovoltaic places, they're not as large because it's not going to maximize the energy output as much, but it still creates a lot of energy. It's just when you have a larger area to work with, you would rather use CST because it will, again, maximize the energy that you're getting from that large area. So now that I've talked about the fundamental technology behind solar energy, I'm going to talk about the statistics for the US and if it's worth it or not to get solar power. So solar power rose 23% globally in 2021 since the previous year. And that shows that a lot of people are investing in solar power because they must believe that it's the right decision to do to start moving away from fossil fuel energy. Wind and solar energy reached a 10.2% share of power generation in 2021, and this was the first time that wind and solar power exceeded more than 10% globally. So I know 0.2% isn't that much more than 10%, but it's amazing that we've reached even that much since the past few years that we've even had solar energy as a major source other than fossil fuel energy. So hopefully this percentage will continue to grow as we move forward and away from fossil fuel energy. Since 2014, the average cost of solar photovoltaic panels has dropped nearly 70%. Think about that, 70%. So if something was $10, it's only going to be $3 now. That is a big drop. And that's probably because they have invested more money into making these more cost and energy efficient, and that's causing more people to fund these solar powers, which is, again, dropping the cost even more. Here's a cool fact about solar power energy. Photovoltaic panels on just 22,000 square miles of the nation's total land area, which is about the size of Lake Michigan, could supply enough electricity to power the entire United States. Think about that. Just Lake Michigan, if we had solar powers on only that much area, we could supply electricity to the whole of the United States without using any fossil fuels. If we actually invested a lot of money into this, we could make it work and we could really quickly move away from fossil fuels. And that's something this is a great thing that's happening. And because of solar energy, Americans have even had more jobs, and solar jobs have increased 167% since they first came, which makes sense because without solar power, there were 0 jobs. Now that it's there, there's 167%. But having solar power is also increasing the amount of jobs for people to have, which is another byproduct that is really good. Now we're going to be talking about whether getting solar power is worth it or not. So over here in the picture, you can see the 30% federal tax credit, and you may be wondering what that is. So basically, the solar tax credit, also known as the Clean Energy Tax Credit, is a federal incentive that allows you to claim back 30% of your total solar panel installation costs when you file your taxes. So basically, when you pay for this solar power, you will be able to claim 30% of it back. So you're not going to be paying what the original cost is. Eventually, you'll get some of that money back. And most home owners in the United States can expect their solar panels to pay for themselves after about 9 to 12 years of having them. So it seems like a long time, but at that point, it'll pay for itself, and then you'll be getting free energy after that. So it does take some time to pay it off, but I think at the end it will be worth it, because 9 to 12 years in the span of what, like the 50 years that you're living is not that much. And as the world improves on its technology and such, this time span will definitely decrease over the future. So those are the benefits, or not benefits, but those are the monetary incentives for getting solar panels and whether it's worth it or not for you. But getting solar panels is also dependent on where you live. For example, Arkansas, that gets very little sunlight, it will not be as efficient to be getting solar power than Arizona or California that receive lots of sunlight. So depending on where you live, getting solar panels might be helpful, but like again, it depends on whether you're getting sunlight. So if you're not getting that much sunlight, eventually you might have to revert back to uh, fossil fuel energy in order to light up your house and stuff like that. Eventually, you have to weigh the moral and physical aspects of getting solar power and decide if it's worth it for you. I think most of the switch from fossil fuel power to renewable energy will have to happen on like the factory scale rather than the homeowner scale. So obviously, doing it in your homes is going to help a lot. But I think most of the carbon emissions is coming from these big factories. So once these big factories start reverting to more renewable sources of energy, that's when the pollution is going to go down. So just investing in solar power isn't enough. So instead of focusing on getting solar panels in everyone's houses, we need to get more renewable energy in the large factory side of the world's production. The thing is, investing in just solar power isn't enough because as of now, the output is not equivalent to the output of fossil fuel energy because there is not as much investments going into there's not as much investments going into solar power than it is fossil fuel energy. Because as you know, we're still going into the ground and extracting all that oil and stuff for fossil fuel energy. So in addition to just solar power, we have to spread into other sources of renewable energy. As of now, we have hydro energy and wind power, but these aren't as effective as solar power because it requires, first of all, wind is not that reliable of a source, and hydropower also and hydropower is not as cost effective as solar power is, and it's obviously much less cost effective than fossil fuel energy. I believe that the main helper will be nuclear energy from fusion because the output of that can match and even be greater than the output of fossil fuels. So I think that's where we need to put our sources to, because I think that's the safest and best alternative to fossil fuel energy that can match and even exceed the amount of energy that we're getting from there. But in order to do that, we need a lot of investment and research that has to go into that because as of now, there is very little research and very little investments, which is why we're not using that as one of our main sources of energy. But I think that it's going to be in the future, I think it's going to be a very large factor in moving away from fossil fuel energy and into renewable energy. Thank you so much for listening to the newest installment of the Climate Crisis Podcast. Please remember to follow me on Instagram at the Climate Crisis Podcast. I'm going to be posting more on there. And in the future, I'll be posting Reels content on there too, which is going to be separate from the content here on the YouTube channel. So if you're interested in that, please go follow the Instagram. I have some infographics up there right now, and I will continue to be posting infographics there in the future. So thank you so much for listening and see you next time. Bye.